But enough about my good times. Let's get into the good times in sports. Some of the bad times in sports we've been having here on BigTimeSportsOhio.com and everywhere else you want to find us. First off of all, Mitch, let's talk about what's going on in the high school world here in Stark and Tuscarawas counties, because I've been going through a lot of this stuff right now. And of course, the basketball season is very much underway on both boys and girls side. And a lot of teams kind of coming out to very surprising starts this year. One particular team on the girls side, one particular team on the boys side. Let's start off on the girls side, because that might partake more to you.
Yeah, listen, this past weekend, obviously, we are in the full swing of high school basketball. I was fortunate enough to get excited. I always get excited for broadcasts, but this past Saturday, having an undefeated Lake girls basketball team come to Jackson. Jackson having one loss in the year, it was their season opener, a 1 point loss, but Jackson undefeated in the Federal League. So immediately it was a very big Federal League showdown early in the season. This Lake team, Mitch, for the past few years, not really last year, but prior to that, they struggled. And you're starting to see why, because they played a lot of players that were young. And last year they made a bit of a statement. And now this year they have come into the high school basketball season as a team to beat. And immediately the 6-0 Lake Blue Streaks coming in, 2-0 in Federal League play, going up against 4-1 Jackson, who was 3-0 in Federal League play. You knew it was going to be good. This Lake team beat Jackson twice last year. But this Jackson team, which there wasn't a whole lot to know about them coming into this year, they returned Megan Campbell, a senior who was part of that Final Four run just 2 seasons ago as a sophomore. They returned Madison Lepley. She was a freshman last year, and then Ashley Lammers, who was a junior last year. You had to start to wonder, okay, where are these other pieces going to come from? And for Jackson, they've turned to a few freshmen. They have Ashley Helly and Lexi Pizer, who are freshmen. One starts, one comes off the bench, the first usually off the bench. And Jackson handed Lake their first loss of the season, 47-40. It was pretty much all polar bears after the first quarter. But that fourth quarter came, and Lake was not going to go quietly. It was a 16-point lead through three quarters for Jackson. Lake then rallying to make a ferocious comeback, the final 47-40. The one thing, though, is Serenity Johnson picked up 4 fouls early in that game. She had 2 fouls in the first. She picked up her third in, I believe, the end of the first quarter. And so you just knew right away, okay, you're probably not going to see her again in the first half. Third quarter comes around, not even a minute. I believe it's 58 seconds into the third quarter. She picked up her 4th foul, an offensive foul. Immediately, that's one of Lake's top returning players, along with Emma Anderson. So you take one of the best players from Lake, probably Mitch, the most athletic player for Lake, out of the game. Jackson really started to build a lead. And then head coach Ashley Como faced no choice, with Jackson having that 16-point advantage after 3, to put her back in. She did her thing. She got scoring, obviously did not lead the team in scoring. That was done by Emma Anderson, who had 17, then Paige Marshall, who had 9. But Serenity really made her presence felt. Now, the downside, fast breaks Jackson had in the fourth, she had to just stand there because she couldn't risk to pick up that 5th foul. Jackson, though, survives that run. Megan Campbell, 20 points, coming off her career high of 21 on that win over Hoover last week. So she picks up where she left off. Ashley Lammers had 8. Madison Lepley was 7. Really, Mitch, those are probably the 3 names you're going to hear the most for Jackson this year, assuming they all stay healthy, in terms of scoring for the Polar Bears. But Jackson with a major Federal League win. And this is a team that you lose 2 Division I recruits in Lauren Pilata, Lena Patabana last year. You weren't sure what they would look like this year. This is a young team. Like I mentioned, they only have a few seniors. And head coach Anthony Butch is leaning on the freshmen and these other underclassmen, and some juniors didn't get much playing time last year. And so far, it has Jackson at 5-1 overall and 4-0 in the Fed, sitting atop the Federal League undefeated. You look at the rest of the Federal League in girls basketball, Hoover lost 58-42. They fall to 0-5, 0-4. That's just such a tough spot to be in for Hoover, because this is their 4th coach in 4 years. A number of seniors decided not to come out. That is so hard to get seniors to buy into their 4th coach in 4 straight years, that I'm sure all have different philosophies offensively, defensively. However, there's still talent in that Vikings team. So it's not a team I want to sleep on. Green, though, picks up a win. They get a very big win. And so now this Federal League is kind of just, you're waiting to see who's going to blink first. Because right now, Jackson has the bullseye on their back, 4-0 in Federal League. But Jackson's played McKinley. They've played Green. They played Hoover and they've played Lake. Now they are off till Friday. The girls play Friday night at 5:30, followed by the boys at 7. It is something the Federal League's doing this year. Every Federal League team gets a home game where the girls will play before the boys. And then obviously every team in the Fed will play away. So this is Jackson's doubleheader this year, where the girls will play at home against Glen Oak at 5:30, then the boys at home against Glen Oak at 7. Now we'll get to the boys here in a second, but it doesn't matter what the record is for the Glen Oak girls Golden Eagles basketball team, because they have one of the best coaches in all of Stark County, one of the most respected coaches in all of Ohio, in Paul Wackerly. This is a team that's probably going to throw something at Jackson they haven't seen yet. So I'm intrigued to see how Jackson responds having 6 full days off. They get to rest up. I have to imagine they're probably going to go watch Glen Oak play on Tuesday, or Wednesday, excuse me, the girls, if they're in action. I'm assuming Jackson boys will go do the same because Glen Oak is in action on Tuesday. I'm very intrigued to see how this happens, because when Wackerly took over the job at Glen Oak, this was a team that nobody wanted a piece of. They had some of the best talent in the Federal League, some of the best playmakers, and some would argue the best coach. And it all changed back in the playoffs a few years ago when Jackson upset them in the playoffs. They've done it now a few times, but I'm excited because right now this girls basketball in the Federal League is just so open. Jackson right now sits atop, but it's the Federal League. Anybody can beat anybody on any given night. There's no slouch. I mentioned Hoover's record, but that's not a team you can take lightly because there is talent there. There's young players trying to prove themselves. So we're not even to Christmas yet. It'll be the last game for all the Federal League teams this upcoming week on Friday, Saturday, before you go into the holiday break. I'm very intrigued to see what transpires over the next week, because this could get really, really interesting and clustered before you hit the holiday break.
Well, you talk about some of those games that we're having up on Big Time Sports, some of them including on Tuesday's doubleheader of Dover at New Philadelphia, and Lake taking on those Green Bulldog boys team. Then we also have the girls Garaway versus Strasburg matchup, which I'll be on call for on Wednesday, followed by on Friday, Highland at Tusky Valley and St. V's at McKinley. We also have a Saturday matchup, Garaway at Highland Girls, while we have a wrestling match on Wednesday, I believe, Claymont at Indian Valley. Excuse me, that would be Thursday. So we have that. You mentioned those games in there, the very interesting matchups as well. You also saw the Hall of Fame City Hardwood Classic this past week, where Stark County teams went 5-1. Central Catholic beat Mogador, Canton South beat Dalton, Lake lost to Ashland, excuse me. Hoover beat Hoban, Glen Oak beat Menor in a high-scoring matchup, and Massillon beat Walsh Jesuit. Mitch, these Massillon Tigers are unbeaten so far this year.
Mitch, call me crazy. Winning's contagious. I've mentioned it before. You saw it in 2010. I got to witness it firsthand when Jackson won their first ever state championship in any event with the basketball team. Then you look at 14, baseball wins. Then in 17, you had basketball winning a state championship. You had baseball winning a state championship. Mitch, I don't know if you know this, but the Massillon football team recently won a football state championship, the first in the playoff era. And there's a number of players on that basketball team that were on that state championship football team. Now, I'm not going to go as far to say Massillon basketball can win states this year, although anybody can. It's up for the taking, obviously. We're early in the season. But winning's contagious. And having those guys with that championship pedigree coming to the basketball floor now, knowing how hard you have to work to get there, being able to bring all the rough parts they went through, pretty much the state championship game of that phenomenal defensive battle, I think it means something. And I think the Massillon Tigers basketball team is actually a really good basketball team. And they are going to be a team that nobody's going to want to face. And them being undefeated does not shock me so far. Now, obviously, they're not in the league. We'll have to see what the rest of their season schedule looks like and what transpires. But you mentioned these other teams. I mean, they're not playing no names. They're not beating slouch opponents. They're beating good high school basketball teams and programs. And I think that speaks a lot to the success other sports are having there. And it's just, you mentioned the Hall of Fame City Hardwood Classic, and really Stark County putting on a show. How about Glen Oak beating Menor? And that's without Bryce Broom. Bryce Broom started that game, but ended up suffering an injury on an undercut underneath the basket. He has to leave the facility to get tended to. And Glen Oak they don't miss a beat. They really don't. And They defeat Menor 82-73. Menor is such a tough team, such a well-coached team too. And the reason I'm talking about Glen Oak now is because this is a team that suffered their first loss last week on Big Time Sports against McKinley at home. There's something about this Golden Eagles basketball team, though, away from their high school. This is a team last year that took everybody by storm. They started off hot. I believe they were 11-0, and then Jackson, in the new year, first game after the calendar turn, went over there and they throttled them. Jackson throttled Glen Oak. This team, I may be off by a few games here, but I do believe dating back to last year, Mitch, is 11-0 when they play road league games. Now, obviously, they've picked up another win this past weekend over Menor that was not at their home floor, but then you have to count the loss they had in the playoffs last year. But this is a team that came to Jackson last year and routed Jackson then. This is a team that is very talented, led by Ja'Cory Lipkins. He had 24 in that win. Bryce Broom only had 6, but he is a dangerous shooter if he's able to play and clears, gets cleared to play. What also is extremely exciting, Mitch, is Broom shoots the ball so well from behind the arc, and so does Mitch Finnefrock from Jackson. Jackson beat Lake this past weekend in Federal League play. Finnefrock had 4 3-pointers in the first half, including an and one that he converted. He was the high scorer in the game with 20. Kyle Monterubio had 18. Cam Weekly had 17. Those are all juniors for Jackson. Jackson has one senior on the roster, Anthony Fuline, starting point guard. When Jackson's guards can play like that, Mitch, it's going to be hard to beat Jackson. The issue is going to be when they run into a team of size. They have one player over 6'3". That's Landon Thiel, the sophomore. He's a 6'7" center off the bench, most notably known for his amazing performances on the mound this past spring for baseball. But if Jackson can play the style they want to play, they're going to be tough to beat. But guess what? When Hoover boys basketball gets you to play the style they want to play, they sucker you into a trap and you can't get out of it. And Hoban learned the hard way in that Hardwood Classic. Hoover with a win over Hoban, 48-39. This is a team coming off a state championship in basketball. Hoover beat Jackson last week. They are 3-2. They are a team that plays a completely different style of basketball versus everybody else in the Federal League. They like to slow it down, grind it out, make every pass they can to find an open shot. And for some people, Mitch, guess what? Oh, it's so boring to watch. It's not fun to watch. You know who doesn't care? Head coach Mike Bluey and his staff and his basketball team. Because if they're winning, they're doing their job. And it falls on the other teams to get Hoover out of the style they want to play. And Hoover already shown you at 3-2, this is a team that did not perform well last year, that they are going to stay disciplined. You're going to play the style in which they want to play. And if you fall in that trap, they can beat you. And Hoover right now is that team that I think you looked in the crystal ball, you said, wow, Green returns 4 starters and their first guy off the bench who's now a starter this year. Glen Oak returns 2 of the top players. Jackson returns 3 starters and their first guy off the bench from last year. Lake returns possibly the best overall player in the Federal League who we haven't seen yet due to injury, and Chance Kassenheiser. Those teams are going to be tough to beat. Here's Hoover at 3-2, already beating Jackson in Federal League play. This league is going to be fun. And Lake, although they fell to Jackson, it was 32-29.5. It was a close game before Jackson got going. Lake and Josh Cofield, their center, I believe had 10 and I want to say 8 rebounds in the first half. And Jackson figured something out at halftime, took him out of it. But this Lake team, if they tread water, Mitch, if they somehow tread water here and learn how to pick up some wins, not in the Federal League or in the Federal League, it seems like Kassenheiser could be back come January. This is a team that's either going to be right back in the thick of things, or this is a team that's going to play spoiler. And not only are they going to play spoiler, this is a team that's probably going to be underseeded come playoff time that you're not going to want to face because they're well coached. They have a lot of great surrounding players. They're just missing their best player. And I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. But with him out, other kids get to grow up faster, get to, score a little bit more to where Kassenheiser can come back and say, all right, I can trust this guy. I can trust this guy and this guy, we can do this. It's going to get very interesting now in the Federal League. And just what an overall job by Stark County this past weekend in basketball. I mean, you mentioned some of these teams that picked up wins. We mentioned Glen Oak, we mentioned Hoover. Uh, Massillon gets a win. It was a very strong showing. And I think that when it comes playoff time, which is going to look completely different this year, these are a lot of teams that you could possibly see not only advancing into the districts, but winning districts and advancing to the regionals, which I'm extremely excited about.